Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we have Pat Vellner. Pat is an absolute beast within the competitive world of CrossFit, having finished on the podium 4 times over the years. Most recently, second place finish at the 2021 CrossFit Games. Just happened recently. We talk a little bit about what that experience was like in Madison, getting back out in front of the fans, in front of the competitors in person. He started out the competition in terrible 35th place in that first event, but then came back incredibly strong, finishing first in the second event. He had 3 first place finishes over the course of the weekend. We talk about what the ups and downs look like through the course of 15 events over 4 days, what his coaching environment is like working with a coach that's on the other side of Canada that works remotely with him. We talk a little bit about the mental side, being that he's a very cerebral athlete that thinks a lot about the ins and outs of competitive nature, and what his next steps are. He's in his 30s now. Does he have the competitive juices to want to come back and try to get that first place finish that's eluded him up to this point? It's always great to talk with Pat. He's a great guy, and we hope you guys enjoy this episode. All right, Pat, thanks so much for taking the time to be with me and Chad today. I appreciate it, man. How you doing?
No sweat. I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good. We've been following the career for a while now. We've been trying to get you out of the Power Monkey Camp for a number of years now, and we are just so excited to be able to see how well you finished up this past weekend at the games, and just for our listeners to be able to give an idea where we are. You just got back. You got back from Madison a few days ago. How's the body feeling? How you doing post 2021 games?
Really good, actually. I think I know I spoke to a number of athletes before we left, and I think people were a bit surprised. Like it wasn't that big of a beatdown. It wasn't as much of a beatdown as I expected for 15 events.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the tests were just programmed in a way where the limiters were maybe not things that would just hurt your body. So it was pretty good. I mean, I feel like most people were sore from the first day of competition, and then you kind of slowly recovered from that throughout the competition. And by Sunday, like I didn't feel that bad at all. I had like a little tired in my pull, stuff like that, but I felt like I could go another 2 days. So
wow,
maybe I should have worked a little harder.
That's absurd to say. 15 workouts in 4 days, and I could have done a couple more.
Yeah, or maybe you guys are just so conditioned from what the games have been the last 10 years or so that this one maybe was a little bit easier on you. But you mentioned a lot of athletes being sore on day one, and day one really stuck out to me from your competition part of it, being that you had a pretty tough finish, I think 35th on event 1. Did that have anything to do with your ability to place first on the second event?
No, I don't think so. A couple people have asked me that, like, did I feel like I was fresher because of that? And it's not that I wasn't trying on the kayak, I'll assure you. Like I just couldn't get it moving fast. I felt like I only kind of had one gear on there and it wasn't moving very quick. So, it's still the same volume of paddling to get across the water. Mm-hmm. And I think that everybody's kind of like, I was getting crampy and like my back and my arms, forearms, that kind of stuff, triceps, like people were sore after the paddle for sure. So I think maybe all it did was give me a little more sense of urgency than some other people might have had in that second event. Because it's tough to go into the second workout of the weekend with already backed into a corner. So, I knew that there was a long haul about to come to try to fight back in a points race. And, that was a pretty good workout, I thought, for me on paper. So it sort of was one that I decided I had to attack maybe a little more aggressively than I otherwise would have.
So something like, the paddle, is that something that you just anticipate not being able to train? I mean, you live up in Canada. Do you have access to that kind of apparatus? Do you do it, or just go into the game saying, I'm going to train as much as I possibly can to get prepared for what I think might happen, and then whatever's thrown at me that is just new, I'm just going to attack it as best I possibly can?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's no way to prepare for everything. So mm-hmm. I think every year you do that. You do as many things as you can, and you prepare for as many things as you can. And then inevitably there's some curveballs that just, now you've got to learn a little bit on the fly. You've maybe got to do a little homework in like a night to see if there's any efficiency tips you can learn. Talk to people, do what you can. But a lot of that stuff you just cannot ever anticipate every time. so, I mean, like a lot of us have kayaked before, but it's the kind of thing you do on like a day off.
Right.
So I highly doubt there's maybe more than a handful of people in the field who had ever raced on a kayak before. And it's not like the kayaks we had were very good. Like they were like little rental kayaks. So it's also probably not the kind of kayak that you can race well on. So, you know, I think you were kind of fighting a combination of factors. And I think people who maybe could learn how to draft on other people's wakes or various little things like that really quickly could be really successful. But yeah, like, I mean, I've paddled before, and like I live on the ocean, like we see kayak occasionally, but like I never do it very hard, like out for a nice casual paddle with my fiance or some friends. And it's just, that's not what we're doing. So, yeah, it's, I think that there's obviously some skill there that I'm lacking right now and I got to learn. But,
what about swimming with fins?
The fins, I think were like, I mean, they were great for most athletes because they'll keep your hips up a little higher and keep your body position a little nicer. So I think people were less limited by their skill in the water than they normally are. It sort of leveled off the skill a little bit. Like I think a really good swimmer will swim faster with fins, but a really bad swimmer will swim even faster than with fins. Like if the good swimmer is going to improve their mile time by 3 minutes, the bad swimmer is going to improve it by 10 minutes. So I think it leveled off the field, I think, in the swim a little more and made it more about the kayak. And, you know, I'm not the best swimmer in the field either. And I am quite a good puller. So I kind of looked at that event as like, you know, I can maybe swim. I can swim hard, but I don't think it's super worth it. I think if you can save your arms a little bit for the paddle, you're going to spend more time there and it might be worth it in the long run to be a little more conservative in the swim and then really try to focus up and pick people off on the boat. So that's how I approached it. And I wasn't aggressive in the water and I probably came out late 20s. But then my plan was to just like go to work and pick people off in the water. And then I just couldn't do it. Like it happened really quickly where I like 20 minutes into the paddle, I was like, this is, I'm not going to be able to pick people off.
Right.
And, you know, I'm losing spaces on the paddle. And so I was just kind of, you just realize you're like, well, that game plan kind of blew up in my face.
Right.
Maybe I should have got out of the water a little faster. And you know, that sort of thing, I think moving in a pack is easier. It's easier mentally and it's easier because there's a little more wake to surf and that kind of thing. So, you know, in hindsight, probably it was a better decision to try to get out of the water in a pack. But you know, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. And building off of what Chad's question was, you know, going from 35th to first and second event, I find this to be the same type of a situation. Maybe it's the same with you, Chad, in a lift in a competition and going from one, maybe you miss your first lift and you come back and you use that first poor lift as maybe fuel or motivation. In gymnastics, you have a bad event, maybe use that as fuel motivation. But one of the things that we kind of hear constantly is this idea of compartmentalization and just saying whatever you're doing in that moment is what you need to be focusing on, letting go of what happened before, forgetting about what you have coming up next. Do you find yourself as an athlete being just in the moment? You seem like the kind of guy that's pretty level-headed no matter what happens. You finish 35th, it's not going to bother me. I'm going to keep going my same pace no matter what. And coming out on first, did the previous event have any effect, or were you just like, this event is more in my wheelhouse, I'm just going to crush it no matter what, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm staying compartmentalized as much as possible from event to event?
Yeah, I think I do that better than most athletes. And I think it served me well in my career because unfortunately I've had to do this 36th to first kind of thing a few times in my career. But I think that I really look at it that way. And I think gymnastics, Dave, is a good example because it's a sport where, yeah, like, you know, you compete and you're all around. And if you blow up an event, you still have event finals and things like that you can qualify for. And you can't give up after one event. Because there's a lot of competition left. And I think at the same time, using that as fuel is good, but it's dangerous because like over arousal is also bad. And like same Chad, like same thing in weightlifting, like all of these sports are very similar in that sense where like you miss one lift and then if you go out and just over pull the next lift, you're also going to miss it.
Right.
So you can't just ride those highs and lows like crazy. Like I think I've been kind of I actually get like not criticized, but my like family and friends and people give me shit all the time because they're like, you're kind of boring to watch. It's like, you know, you don't you don't ever get that excited, but you don't ever get that down on yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
just kind of float in the middle and you do what you need to do. And I think
Mm-hmm.
being able to control that arousal curve is a huge skill when it comes to competing in a lot of tests. And yeah, of course, like I have frustrating moments and I have really bad performances, like epically bad. And I think that you just have to be able to walk away from that and then walk into the next event and not say, oh, I'm going to shoot out of a cannon, and just
Mm-hmm.
like, you got to make responsible decisions every time. And whatever that happens to be for that next event, you know, this time it just so happened that next event was one that I thought I could be quite strong at. So that's great. But if it wasn't, if it was another event where my top potential was maybe tapping top 10, you can't fly out and try to win an event that's like that, because you're just going to then blow up and come 30th again. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a high amount of risk involved in that. And I think it takes a lot of maturity to be able to do that, because you want to go hard. Like you want to
Mm-hmm.
be like, man, I got to make up for those lost points. I got to start, you know, doing damage on the comeback. And, you know, it's not always as sexy as 35th to first. Like sometimes it's going to be 35th to like, all right, 14th, and then a 12th, and then a 20th, and then, oh, here's a good one. And then I take a second and a third. And, you know, you have to pick your battles a little bit. So I was aware of that going into that second event, that like there was some urgency. I felt like this was something I could be good at, but like it's something you could be good at. So don't blow it trying to win it. If it means you take second, like
Mm-hmm.
take third,
Mm-hmm.
like start taking some points and just like start marching, because it's a long climb up and you got to keep making forward progress. Like don't start slipping backwards because you're panicked.
Right.
So I've always been quite good at that. And I think, you know, it comes from competing in a career of gymnastics and competing in other sports and understanding that a little bit, and having trained that muscle a lot growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, yeah, it's, you know, I think it's important. And it's interesting that, you know, people can be affected one way or another. Like I've seen athletes who don't do that really well, and you can get caught in a tailspin. So I've fortunately been very good at avoiding that. But yeah, I wish I didn't have to exercise that muscle so much.
It's a strength though, you know, for those athletes that never have to use it, you know, they get caught in that situation, they panic, you know what I mean? So you're much more prepared than most. Would you say that there was there one event that kind of stood out to you as like your favorite event? Maybe not the one, you know, 3 first place finishes, but is there one that was like, I love this, I'd like to do this workout again?
You know, it's funny. I think that my first place finishes probably weren't the ones that I thought that. I was hearing it from athletes in the back too, because they're like, you know, there's some events are just like easier on you than others. You know, you run 500 meters. Yeah, it's a hard effort, but like, you know, it's not like a blow your brains out kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, some of those things, like being good at the like 10-minute grind or workouts is like a blessing and a curse, you know, like I feel like when I've got to show up for those ones, and, you know, I show up at the start line and I'm like, I think this is a good one for me. I'm like stressed because I know it's going to hurt bad, but I know I can do it. And there's no real excuse. Like it's an execution issue. If I don't do well at it, it's because I made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So that like stresses me out a little bit almost. And you're like, you know, compared to, I feel like some guys who can go out and just do like a 1 rep max squat and win. And like, they already knew they were going to win. And it was just like a matter of like, you know, 3 seconds of effort on a squat. Like I've got to do 10 minutes of like redlining. So I don't know. I mean, some of the ones that are fun. Also, you know, your interpretation of that changes based on how you performed as well.
Sure.
But I thought that yoke carry, the GHD yoke carry sandbag over the hay bale one was fun. It was fun. It was fun partially because the movements are interesting. Like the hay bale sandbag thing is fun. There's a lot to kind of think about while you're doing it, order of operations. And it was fun because we kind of broke the programming on it. Like it clearly was not meant to be completed that fast.
It's crazy.
And the athletes just like overperformed. And
especially considering that the demo team wasn't even close to being able to do what you guys did.
Yeah. I think one of them DNF'd and then one of them finished in like the last interval.
Yeah, the last segment.
And it was interesting to me because there was such a discrepancy. Like we still had a couple athletes cap. We had, you know, I think 5 or 6 athletes either capped or finished in the last interval. But we had, you know, 7 of us finish in the second interval. Like, you know, a couple of people almost make it in one. And it's like, so what's causing that big gap? And we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, I don't know. And like, I think that there was, you know, you couldn't have really made it much heavier without it being a bit dangerous. The weight was heavy. It was just like, people just moved like fast and they sprinted that first section faster than I think was anticipated. And So that was kind of fun. Like it was fun because that was like collectively a win for the athletes over the programming. It was kind of one where like, Dave just kind of dunks on you all weekend long. And then that was one where we
got one back on him.
It was like a full block. We were like, yeah, no,
Nice.
this workout was easy. And
Nice.
so that was cool. It was a fun one. I actually thought the programming was really fun all weekend long. Those clean workouts were fun. I thought, we probably only needed to do one of them. They were basically the same workout, but
right.
That's one that like I would do that again. Like it was a fun workout, and I didn't perform well in them, but those are like, they were cool. Even little things like playing with the freestanding handstand push-up thing and having to learn something on the fly. That's always really fun for me. I liked the field events this year. The North field events, obviously I did well at them too, but the Husafeld stone and rope climb one was a cool combination. That was like, a lot of running back and forth on the field and a lot of gaming with competitors as far as like who's going to pick up the weights first and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I really enjoyed the North field events. I feel like my top three would probably be the yoke workout, the Husafeld stone workout, and yeah, maybe that pig flip one. The pig flips are fun.
I think it's just fun to see everybody out there together again, or you have to compare again. I am curious what your thoughts are in this particular games, being that I'm sure you've gotten this question before, but first one in quite some time that Fraser hasn't been a part of it, and has been the obstacle that you've been trying to overcome for a number of years, and not having him in the mix again opens up the field, right? It made for a very exciting games. Who was going to end up at the top? There's a lot of back and forth throughout the entire weekend. But I'm curious, on one side, are you upset that Fraser's not there for you to potentially take down? Or on some level, is it like, okay, the immovable object is not there, and now the path to the top of the podium is a little bit more achievable now?
Yeah, I mean, I like competing against Matt, and I think that there's something to having to beat the champ to be the champ, and so, I miss him out there, and he's also a personal friend of mine. So I feel like, not only do I not get to like bullshit with them in the back and hang out, you want to land some punches on him too, right? He didn't show a chink in his armor for like half a decade. So I think that's saddens me a little bit, but it's just a different era now. And I think you gotta look at it like that. It's not gonna bring him back. So you just have to look forward at like what opportunities exist in the field now. So I think it's cool that the men's field is more open, and there's a little more uncertainty there. So it's been good. I mean, I think it was a hard year for me to kind of come back, having not competed live in like 18 months. It took me a couple days to really feel like I was comfortable competing. And I think that, having this be the first year maybe in a while where you can really feel like there's like a real shot. I didn't perform very well for the whole weekend. I performed very well sometimes, but I had probably 4 events that I would consider big misses. And so it's just, you don't win like that. And that's why at the end of the day, I didn't. And then Justin was very, very good all weekend long, and he fully deserved to win. There's no doubt in my mind. So, I came on strong at the end, but at the end of the competition, I needed him to like get hurt or drop dead on the last workout in order to win. And I knew that. I know how the points work. Like people were asking on the whole last day, like how, like, I'm trying to close the gap. Sure. But he did everything he could to finish right behind me in every workout, so I wouldn't gain points on him. And he competed brilliantly. And he out-jousted me on the last day. And it was like, I have no problem with that. Yeah. Like it's been 2 years that I haven't performed well at the games for various reasons. So to come back and be able to put a strong year in, and know that there's room for growth there were mistakes that were made, and there's stuff that I can do to fix that. It feels really good. I think, part of me, it feels great because I think there was a contingency of people who were thinking that the sun had kind of set on like guys like myself and Brent after 2 years of not great finishes, and we're 30 plus now, and there's all these young guys everyone's excited about. So it felt really good to slap that one in everybody's face and be like, like there's no doubt that we're still some of the top competitors in the sport. And so, yeah, we're not ready to have the youth movement take over yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. You mentioned there were some workouts that you didn't do great in. Ultimately, you ended up placing second, being on the podium, I believe, for the fourth time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but 4 times on the podium. You've been in this for a while. How much longer do you see yourself going?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm a late starter, right? Like I think I didn't go to the games as an individual until I was 26. So I've since then, yeah, I've had 6 years of individual games and 4 podiums, 2/3, 2 seconds. So I feel like I need to complete that set.
Mhm.
And maybe I need to complete 2 sets.
Right.
But yeah, it's hard to say. Those are hard questions, especially,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna say like I'm old or anything, like at the ripe old age of 31, but um, there's no doubt that there's a lot of young, really good athletes coming in, and I've got lots of experience and I've got lots of skills and I've got lots of fitness left in me. Like I don't feel like I'm slowing down any, but I think the way you manage that and the way you train has to change a little bit.
Mhm.
You've got to respect certain limitations if you're going to aim for longevity. So as long as my body's feeling good and I'm enjoying competing, I'm happy to keep hanging in there, right? And I mean, I
Yeah.
don't want to be hurting myself and hanging in for 30th place, but if I'm competitive and this year I showed I clearly still am, um, I'm happy to put another few years in. And it was an interesting year. I would say that I was stressed maybe more than I have been in the past. It did feel a little bit like a make or break kind of year. Like if I had shown up and taken another 18th place or something, um, I would have been taking maybe a more hard look at like what my options are for the next little while.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I'm glad that things panned out the way they did because I love to compete, and I think being as stressed as I was, having not done it in a while live, it was nice to execute reasonably well and have a good outcome that you can be happy and proud of, and then take it from there. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. As long as I'm like, the keys for me is like my body's still holding up. If I'm still enjoying it and it's not causing me, undue stress, um, and yeah, and I'm still I still feel like I'm competitive. I think
Yep.
that that's still an important key for me. It's too much work for me to show up and take last. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh, I wouldn't want to go out like that. So well, I'm not going to cling on forever, but
Yep.
like I said, I've clearly shown that there's some good years left in this body.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And you answered that question way better than I ever was able to. I even still have people to this day, ask me, when did you retire? And I'm 41 now. And I'm thinking, well, I don't remember ever actually retiring, but maybe I should
Yeah.
officially retire, So it's kind of that thing. My body's feeling good. And yeah, I'm not competing at the elitist level anymore, but it's just a tough concept for me as an elite athlete to wrap my mind around, to say that, it's over. And perhaps for you, Pat, maybe it doesn't have to be. You keep going for as long as you can. There's plenty of masters age categories for you to get into at some point. But one of the things that I would always do, and I still do to this day, and if this ever goes away, I think it's when I am probably done. But no matter how I did in the competition, there was some pleasure there, especially if I did good. Um, and there was some brief relaxation, but almost within the next hour, there was some thought on, okay, how do I move forward? You place second. If I placed fifth where I wanted to place first, or I didn't make a certain weight, I was trying to figure out what my next steps were to improve and get first, or to get that weight the next time. Do you have those moments? And whether you have or you haven't, if you think about it, what are the next steps that you feel you need to take to make sure that you're in the best position possible next year to be at the top of the podium?
Yeah, of course. I think I do that a lot, and I think it's part to how I make those kind of comebacks that I've become so known for, is, having to change this mentality and like constantly think about like what's the next step that's going to keep me moving forward, whether it's in this competition or in the off season. Um, and it's interesting, I think that when you're right, like I think when you lose that kind of mentality is a sign that you might be done with at least a certain level of competitive
Hmm.
or whatever competition that you want to stay involved in. You mentioned, yeah, there's lots of master stuff, but I think there's obviously a clear shift in priorities at some point when I'll have to decide, I'm no longer willing to do what it takes to compete at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
And so where does that leave me? Does it mean I'm going to vanish from the CrossFit space forever? Like, probably not. But, my position will shift slightly. It's quite interesting. I talked to Scott Panchik a bit about that this last week. And, he obviously announced his retirement, and he knew he would be retiring before the competition started. And I get along great with Scott. I've talked to him over the years. I think he's an awesome athlete and a great role model in general. He's a good dude. And I just talked to him a bit about that. It's been a minute since we've been competing, and we were, sitting in the back. I forget what event it was. It might've been before event 2. And, I was feeling some pressure to perform well because I needed to. And I was just kind of sitting back there, and I had every reason to be confident in that workout, but I was like sick nervous, right? I felt super, super nervous and stressed. And I was kind of sitting and thinking to myself, I'm like, why do I do this to myself? Like, if I'm this stressed,
right?
Like, am I just going to be this stressed all weekend long? And this is just like, and it is like that every time. Like, I do this every time I compete. It's like, there's moments where you're just so stressed out, and I'm like, why do I do this? And we got talking about it, and it's kind of a reframing thing. And I just like kind of laughed and said, hey, Scott, like, how nervous? Like, you nervous? And he's like, dude, so nervous. And I just said, yeah, like, it never goes away. He's been doing this for like 10, 11 years, right? And he said, it never goes away. Yeah. And he said, I think if it ever goes away, that's when you stop. And I said, yeah, I fully agree. I think that what it means is that you care about what you're doing. Like, you wouldn't be stressed if you didn't care at all. And so it sort of just shows a level of like, that you are really invested in what you're doing. You've put a lot of work in. You want to see that, you want to reap the benefits of what you sowed. And you're just sort of, I think it's the easiest way to put it is like, you're stressed because you care a lot. And if you stop being stressed, it's because you've stopped caring. And then that might be it for you. So people ask it all the time. It's like, do you still get nervous? Do you still get nervous? And it's like, yeah, like every time, regardless of the event, if it's something I'm going to be good at, bad at, it doesn't matter. Like, you're still always nervous. And it's because, you've put a lot of time and energy and effort into it, and you want to see it be worth something, and you care about your outcomes, and you care about, your performance. And that, so it's an interesting thing that just never goes away. And yeah, that was kind of what we had said in the end is like, I'd be worried if I wasn't nervous.
Yeah. This is actually an interesting topic. It's actually something I wanted to bring up to you, being that, you come off as someone that's pretty low key and manages the emotion side of competing at a high level pretty well, like outwardly, fans and observers, you come across as someone that doesn't allow the nerves to take hold as much. But I know with the games being on that you've probably had not very much time to be watching the Olympics at all, but I know you're a former gymnast. Curious if you've seen any things that have been going on the gymnastics side, because the stressful side of competing at a high level has become an extremely hot topic recently, right? So what happened with Simone Biles,
yeah, of course,
and things like that. And I'm curious what your take is on the mental side of competing. You're talking about the stressfulness of and the anxiety and the nerves that come along with being an elite athlete and how you manage it. And you talked about, just chatting with Scott being an outlet for you to be able to say, you know what, everybody's dealing with the same thing. We're all nervous out here. That's helpful to me to be able to overcome and to be able to get back out there and say, okay, I can probably do this. Are there other tools that you use to be able to deal with those nerves? They're inevitable, right? Like you said, if you're out there and you care about this, they're going to happen. What are some of the things that you've learned that you use to be able to kind of deal with those when you're out there?
So yeah, I actually have been watching a lot of Olympics. I feel like it's been fun. It's been fun at the end of a day of competition. I would just watch the Olympics for a couple hours.
Sweet,
watch other athletes perform at their highest level on their biggest stage. I think it's awesome. And I saw Simone's vault and I almost shit my pants watching it. Like, it's the scariest thing in the world if you've ever done that before.
Yep.
I cannot believe she landed on her feet.
I know.
And actually didn't like fall. But she landed so deep, I was like, her knees are like mangled. Like,
it was like a cat being dropped out of like a 10-story building and like landing on their feet.
It was terrifying. So I get that. And I think that there's when it comes to competition and dealing with stuff like that, there's a lot of pressure on athletes to perform well. Like I'm not blind and ignorant and deaf. Like when it comes to the games, like I know people were like expecting me to perform well and have a year and whatever. And there's like, it's hard to ignore that because you're surrounded by it. So an athlete, like Simone or somebody like that, that is just like there's nothing you can do but let people down almost at a certain point. So you work so hard to get to a certain level and reach the peak of what you can do. And it's weird. It's not what you think sometimes. And there's a certain weight of expectation that's really difficult. Now in a sport like in gymnastics, or really in a lot of sports, if you're a football player, like I played lacrosse for years, and in a contact sport like that, it's the same. If you lose that confidence or that comfort, it becomes dangerous. And I think CrossFit is not really like that. So I think we deal with things in a different way than, an athlete like Simone, who's, if you space out in a skill like that, you could die. You could seriously hurt yourself. And so to have her be able to look at the weight of the pressure and expectations put on her and the risk that she was going to put herself at and what her confidence level was at, and say no thanks, takes a huge amount of courage, and it's one of the hardest things for an athlete to do. Like, you think after however many hours of training she wanted to not compete? Like, are you crazy? And same thing, like I said, if you're a football player and you're nervous and you're a half a step slow or you hesitate, like that's when you get hurt. Like, you need to push forward. Like, athletes need to move forward. Like, those moments of hesitation can be super detrimental to performance and dangerous to athletes in some sports. So it's hard. Like, at some point, if you get to a point where you feel like you've lost that aggression or that whatever it is in your sport that keeps you sharp, sometimes you need to either take a break and find it again, or maybe it's a retirement thing, like, because it can be actually dangerous in some sports. Like I said, we're fortunate that often I'm in a lane by myself and I can control a lot more. And the skills we have are a little bit less dangerous in general, susceptible to maybe small injuries, repetitive strain injuries, but not catastrophic injuries in general. We do still see, like, look at Brooke Wells snatching this year at the games, a snatch she's probably hit 1,000 times, and it happens. So it's interesting. And I think, I'm someone who manages it reasonably well, but I think it's a very different thing from different sports. And I had one more thing I wanted to say and I kind of lost it, but anyway, I feel like, we all feel that. And I think you have to really weigh it out for yourself and see how you're going to manage it. Oh, you're asking about how I deal with,
how you deal with.
So my, I think that's something you learn about yourself. And I think that people do it differently. And I really actually try to respect everyone's process. If I was really trying to be the ultimate competitor, I could rattle some chains in the back by just fucking with people, because I know what they want and what they want to do to focus up. And I know how to make that not happen for them. And so I could do that, but I typically don't. And I think that usually I'm someone who likes to, like I said with Scott, I like to talk to people. I'm very much an open book. This year, a lot of the rookies actually thought it was weird and they loved it. They were like, you feel like you're so loose and you're happy to talk about whatever and be like, oh yeah, how hard or how shitty this was going to be, or how sore my legs are. There's a lot of people who really try to remain very stoic and put on a brave face, and it's all bullshit. I've seen it a million times. It's all posturing. It's dude, look, if I'm sore and feeling like shit and I'm in second place, I know you feel bad. It's not. So whatever, it's hard. It's super hard, and you should be proud of that soreness, but don't pretend it's not there. So I always find it's funny. It provides levity for me. I like to talk to people. I like to joke. I like to do things like that. And some other people do as well. And I find it breaks the tension and it just helps me relax. And if you can compete relaxed, you can compete a lot better typically. So I see a lot of people who like to isolate, or, they seem quite tense, and maybe they feel like they need that edge, and that's totally fine with me. You can do it. And I typically just let them do their thing. And you tend to gravitate to people who have the same kind of stress response as you do. But I'll find that, more often than not, the more stressed I am, the more chatty I get. and I want to like talk to people because it grounds me a little bit, and it sort of gets me out of my own head. And you know, we've all done the training. Like I've done the movement a million times. I have the skills. I have the strength. Like if I can just trust my abilities, things are going to be okay. A lot of time, the stress, you get in your own way. And so I find that if I can just get rid of that and be loose, I'm all good. So that's sort of how I've approached it over the years. And so I know sometimes it comes off to people like I look a little bit aloof in the back sometimes, and I don't care, but I just know that that's how I need to be in order to compete my best. And the reality is, yeah, like it might not be the same as you, and that's totally fine. So I think what you learn over years of competing is what works for you, and don't be shy about what it is, because you don't need to do what somebody else is doing to make it work. Like I couldn't win the games the way Matt Fraser wins the games, and that's just a reality. We're different people. We compete differently. We harness our energy differently, and we focus differently, and that's just it. So you know, the trap is seeing that and being like, that's a champion. That's how you do it. And then maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Like, I don't know, maybe it will work for you, but maybe it won't. There's equal odds. And so you just have to figure it out. And just, yeah, like trust what works for you. Like, don't let it freak you out.
Well, before we move on from this, and Chad, I'll let you take the next piece here, but I'm curious if there are any athletes in the back that you're aware of, that you've seen actually trying psychological warfare on other people and trying to see if anything will get them to implode on the next event. Are there athletes actually doing that back there?
I don't know. I don't think anybody is maliciously trying to affect other people's performance. And maybe I'm just like a little blind to it because I'm doing my own thing and not really paying attention. But yeah, I don't think that there's no malicious intent back there. People are pretty respectful. And I think in general, it's a pretty good cohort of athletes. I think it takes a lot to get there, and there's a lot of mutual respect for people's abilities. And you know, people know a little bit about each other too. So sometimes at a certain event, you just kind of know who the top kind of people will be. And so, yeah, you just kind of objectively respect people's abilities and performance. I've seen a lot of performances at the games where I was just like, hats off to you, because I could never do that. And that was super impressive.
Right.
So I think that people are, I mean, people do things differently and they focus differently, like I said, but I've never really seen anybody trying to get in someone else's way intentionally, at least not that was really apparent. And I'm not babysitting every athlete, so maybe it exists. I would say I'm probably more than most the athlete who will like go talk to other athletes. So if anything, it's maybe me, but I'm not doing it on purpose, I assure you.
That's awesome. Well, I wanted to go back to your answer on, you know, the mental and the emotional part of it, and overcoming it and being able to compete and everything else like that, because I appreciate the way that you answered that. You basically said you really didn't give any tips, right? There's not really any tips to give to anyone. I mean, I'm a teacher at heart, so I'm always trying to figure out ways to help people lift more weight and perform to the best of their ability if competing is what they want to do. And I've found that to be the most challenging aspect of it, the mental and emotional part of competing, far less than the physical. Getting someone stronger, that's far easier. Teaching them technique, you know, maybe even teaching them how to focus appropriately through a lift. But as far as being in the middle of a competition and performing and handling all that, it's really tough because, like you said, it is very individual. You know, you have to find the emotional state that fits you best. Like if that's you being up all the time and constantly, which is more possible in a sport like weightlifting, because we have 3 lifts in the snatch and 3 in the clean and jerk, and we're done within a couple hours. You know, it's different in CrossFit when, you know, maybe a general recommendation, a better general recommendation is for someone to be more even killed throughout the course of however many days you guys compete. But I found that to be a difficult thing to really help someone through. And would you say that perhaps the best answer for someone out there that is interested in learning how to be better at this is to, one, learn the movements, learn how to execute them. And then as far as the competition part, just go do it. Like, just go do it and keep showing up, because I can't really teach that specific person what to do in that regard if they've never competed, and I'm not going to know them near as well as they're going to know themselves after they do 3 competitions, 5 competitions, and especially 10 competitions over the course of, 2 or 3 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think to your credit, being a good coach, that's a huge element of it. And I think some people only coach specifically that. Like I've never worked with a mental coach or anything like that, but a lot of people do. And I think it's kind of a specialized area where it's hard. And I think a really good coach understands that you need to deal with different people differently based on their needs emotionally, psychologically. Like that's just reality. People are different. We handle criticism different. We handle failure differently, success differently. Like that just goes without saying. Well, maybe it should go without saying, but maybe it doesn't. But everybody has different needs. And I think that, having a flexible, adaptable approach and a unique approach for every athlete is super important. As far as learning that stuff, I do agree. I think it's hard to tell someone. I think it's something that you kind of learn through experience, and there's good ways to do that. And I think that CrossFit is actually a hard sport to learn it in. You're right. Baseline, obviously learn your skills, things like that. I think I've talked to a lot of people who say they want to be competitive in CrossFit and, where to begin. And of course, that's a good starting point. And I think a great one, a piece of advice I usually give people is like, have you ever done a competition? Like go do one and see if you like it. Because some people, it just doesn't agree with them, like that atmosphere, that stress, and they think they see someone else do it and, win an event or finish on a podium. And they're like, I want to do that. But there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. And they maybe don't realize that until they try it. And they say, wow, like actually come to think of it, I like the outcome of this. I like the photo. I don't really like this. And you have to, if you're going to do it, it's a long process. And if you don't like that daily piece of it, I'll tell you something, like 99.9% of my time is spent like training in a dark gym by myself. And then I get 0.1% of the time where I get to stand on a podium and wave. And it's sweet, but like that alone is not going to get you there. And I think that the hard part about CrossFit is it's hard to compete a lot.
Right.
So I think you learn those skills by trying on different hats. Like, go in, try to be the guy that's like intense and has they're stressed for the whole time. And, they're walking around operating at like 10 on 10 the whole time. And maybe that's your vibe and it works great for you. Try it another time, being even keeled, letting things flow off you. Like, see what works for you, because you might not know until you try. So wear a couple hats, see what you like, see what works, and then go from there. But the problem is there's not a lot of opportunity. Like if you're doing 3 or 4 CrossFit competitions in rapid succession, that's hard on you.
Yeah.
And it's hard to deal with that and train around that. And, so I think that I've developed those skills by competing in other sports. Like, I played a lot of other sports, like played lacrosse where I was playing like, 30, 40 games a season. And, how many opportunities in a game are you faced with situations that you have to deal with stress or deal with high pressure situations, and how do you manage that? You deal with ups and downs in the middle of a game. Like competing in gymnastics was great. Like, yeah, how many times did I fall in the middle of a like all around qualifying round, and like you got to deal with the rest of your events now, and deal with situations where you may have executed a routine perfectly in training 1,000 times, but on game day you fell, and that's the only one that matters. And so how do you manage those emotions? How do you find that sweet spot for yourself? And that's the biggest sticking point for me. Is it's something I think I agree you learn by doing and trying maybe different personas, as weird as that sounds. Trying different styles, playing with different things, seeing what makes you feel the most comfortable. But CrossFit just doesn't have that many competitions, or it's harder to compete that many times and get the reps in. I think it's also something that's a practiced skill. And if you can only compete, in an old system where maybe you might do a local competition or two, and then you've got like maybe regionals in the games, if you make it there. But like if you're someone who's trying to make it to the games and you're a regional level, like you really only got a couple shots a year to hone those skills, and that could take you 10 years. And then by the time that goes by, there's another young bunch of people coming up, and it's hard to compete now. So I think it's my advice always for young people is to like learn your skills and play other sports while you're young, because I think there's a lot of skills you learn in other sports that are very transferable, and you just get more opportunity to practice in like a league in another sport. And so that's always been my kind of take on it.
Yeah, absolutely a skill, no doubt about it. I'm so glad that you said that. I was sitting there thinking the same thing, and it's something that I tell to people all the time. Like, this is something separate. You have to look at competing as a skill in itself, and the only way that you're going to develop that is by going to compete. For CrossFitters, like you said, it's definitely tough. I mean, you can't really go do a local competition every weekend. That's going to just completely tear you up. But this is another reason why I recommend that athletes that do want to compete in CrossFit do a little weightlifting competition, right? Maybe 2 or 3 of those a year are doable on top of the maybe 2 or 3 CrossFit competitions. And it's just an opportunity to practice competing, to be in that experience. And weightlifting too, any opportunity to talk about weightlifting, right, Pat? But it's different than CrossFit. You're out there on a platform completely by yourself. And if you can get good and comfortable with that, something that's a little bit different than CrossFit, it's only going to add to your toolbox and your ability.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And I think actually the elements of pressure and stress in weightlifting are the hardest ones in CrossFit. Like, I think you never get more stressed than for a workout that's like 30 seconds long or 1 minute long. So those types of things where you really only get one crack at it, one mistake will scrap the whole thing, one misstep. Like, we see events like that pop up from time to time. And I mean, when we do 1 rep max lifts, it's the same thing. Those are the really stressful ones. If I've got a 20-minute workout, I can hide mistakes. Like, my fitness can hide mistakes, my skills, my strategy can hide mistakes. When you don't have that much time, one mistake will cost you everything. And when it's 1 rep for like a weightlifting competition, there's no room for mistakes. So those are the really high pressure situations that are, in fact, the hardest ones that we deal with in our world. So if you can get good at that and increase your exposure to that and get more comfortable, yeah, you're laughing. Like, the other stuff is easy. When you've got a 10-minute thing where it's like 1,000 reps, 1 rep doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. It's a drop in the bucket. When it's 1 of 1, you better hit that fucking snatch. Like, that's the thing.
Right. It's like walking a tightrope. And my life will be complete if we can just get gymnastics taken completely out of CrossFit. Then we're good to go. How about that?
That's not gonna happen. They're adding more gymnastics. We're just scratching the surface on how gymnastics is incorporated in CrossFit. Just recognize that. We got 6 more events that we're gonna start adding.
There you go. I want to see beam. I want to see beam out there.
Yeah, beam. Yeah.
Maybe. How many guys do you think we'd see just fully crotch the beam?
Oh, all of them. Just about all.
100%. 100%.
I know that would happen to me if I had to do it.
It's good TV.
But, yeah. I'm curious about the coaching side. You mentioned you're normally in a dark hole training by yourself. You don't have other athletes at a high level that you train with on a regular basis. Is Michelle still your coach? Is she still who you work with? So, we've worked with Michelle quite a bit. We've been to DECA a bunch. Chad and I both love the way that Michelle trained as an athlete, but also her approach as a coach. I'm curious what she's added to your training and how the relationship is between you and her, being that she was an athlete at such a high level too.
It's kind of interesting. I started working with her in basically 2016. And, like I said, in a 6-year individual career, I've been on the podium 4 times. She hasn't given me any reason to doubt her ever. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. I think we have a very similar personality and we get along very well. We have a very open communication. I probably annoy the shit out of her for most of the year. I have something to say about everything. Right. And she's very good with me and I think that she understands that that's kind of part of my process. I think I complain a lot about little things, or I dissect things to an interesting degree. And she has done a good job of, over the years, balancing that with I know what I'm talking about in a lot of places. So balancing that with sometimes it's just, you got to shut up and do it because it's going to be what it's going to be on game day too. And you got to be able to do that. Not everything needs to be symmetrical and perfect and you need to be analyzed to that degree because it's just not the way it's going to be. So her experience in the sport, I think, has lended itself a lot to that. She's smart and pays attention to the the season, into, what's developing in CrossFit. And so I think we do a pretty good job of anticipating certain things. So usually I maybe have done some of these things before other athletes have, because she's good at getting creative with certain things. We've changed over the years. Like this last year, we trained at a little lower volume because I'm getting a little older. And, at the end of last year, I got hurt, basically buried under a lot of training volume. And so we've sort of changed our approach over time. So she's great. She doesn't have any kind of ego where I think she feels threatened by, I don't know what I say or things like that. I think that she's really good at listening to feedback and open to changing things and adjusting things to make it work. And at the same time, like, I'm not trying to not work. Like, I'm happy to show up and I will do everything she says, and usually nothing more and nothing less. Like, I haven't skipped a piece of training in many years, and I don't ever plan to, but I usually don't do anything extra and above and beyond. So she knows that. And I think it's been interesting having a female coach as well. I think that there's an interesting element to that in the sport, because, like it or not, I think the guys look at workouts slightly differently than the women do sometimes. So when we look at events and we talk about, plans and strategy, there's been more than a few times where I'm like, look, I think the workout is this, this is the funnel, like, this is the sticking point, this is whatever, this is how I think you're going to win it. And then she has a very different take than I do. And sometimes we'll be like, oh, it's good to bounce that ball back and be like, oh shoot, I didn't even think of it like that. Okay, maybe I'm wrong, maybe this. And, in a competition, we did that in a couple events on the weekend, and fortunately, sometimes with a heat advantage, you can look and see and say, okay, it looks like you were right on this one. All right. So I think that this is more what you were saying. And then we can move forward with that. Or even on the fly on the competition floor, you say, well, it looks like this is starting to tip more towards what I was thinking. And then you can kind of drive forward with that. So I think there's some advantage and some elements there. I've loved working with Michelle. I think we have, like I said, a very similar maybe affect and attitude. And I think at times we can be a little nihilistic, and it's just sort of part of how we communicate. And it's funny, and we get it. And I sometimes, I'm certainly not the athlete who's like, everything's always going to be okay. Yeah. I'm the athlete who like looks at a workout and I'm like, this is going to fucking hurt. Right. And it is. And I'm like totally okay with that. I'm not going to not do it. I'm like, yeah, this is going to really suck and it's going to ruin my day. And then, I stand in the back and I say that in the corrals, and the other athletes look at me like, oh shit. And I'm like, yeah, this is going to really suck. Hey. And people, a lot of people don't think or behave like that. So Michelle does. And I think it's funny, and it's sort of part of why we get along so well. But it's been good. I mean, the challenge for us in the last while has been that she is in Montreal and now I'm on the West Coast. So I'm a lot farther away. And that's where it's really nice that I've been with her for many years. Is I've worked with her for camps. I've lived close with her for a long time. Like, we've spent months before the games together several times. And so, when I get feedback or cues or things like that, I've usually heard them before, and I know exactly what she's saying and what she means. And so, it works because we've got that strong foundation. I think I'm not someone who typically loves remote coaching. But again, it's hardly remote. I very much, I talk to her every day pretty much about whatever we're doing that day. And I ask for clarity on every workout. What's the goal here? What's the stimulus? Like, what am I looking for? So it would be as if she was standing next to me a lot of days.
Right. Yeah, it is kind of interesting, the fact that you guys are in different cities, and what we're seeing kind of a transition to with a lot of athletes is athletes moving to kind of hub locations where athletes are all training together, right? You have this in Nashville, you have it in Cookeville, you have it in Boston area now. And you're seeing a little bit more of these coaches bring in athletes so they're all training under the same kind of environment. You have Michelle on the other side of the country. You have a great relationship. Do you think it would benefit you from being in a situation where you were with her or other athletes on a regular basis? Say you moved to Montreal, a few other athletes moved there, you were under the DECA house there. Would that benefit you? Or you think at this point in your life, you're 30 plus, you have other outside things going on? Are you just kind of set in your ways in terms of what you think is optimizing your potential to end up on the top of that podium?
I think there's a few things to look at with that. I think that in a perfect world, I would love that to be close to her. I don't think I need other athletes around. I don't actually think it's that beneficial. I think there's a bit of it's a bit of a misidentification of what's important in training. There is, I think that, and a bit of a misidentification of training versus competing. I think there's a huge risk in those camps that, it works fine if you're like one male athlete, one female athlete, where you're not actually a direct competition. The workouts are different for you. Like sometimes the weights are scaled slightly differently. Like certain events, we see the women always beat the guys. Certain events, we see the guys always beat the women. So that's fine because there's no direct comparison. As soon as you have a guy you're training with who is your direct competition, every piece of training has extra weight added to it. You're 3 weeks out from the games and so-and-so is beating you, 4 workouts out of 5. What's going on? Like you should be worried because you're about to go compete against them. And I think sometimes there are pieces of training that are meant to train very specific skills or specific intensities, time domains, whatever it is. And you can miss those stimulus by over competing. Like, let's say you're meant to be doing whatever, a zone 2 workout on an off day, and you're doing it next to the guy that's been beating you all week. Are you guys going to both ride at zone 3 now, zone 4? Now your day off turned into a day on. And now what happens in 3 weeks of training like that? Like, I think there's some value to competing and doing things correctly, for lack of a better word. Like, I think there's a plan, and when your coach has a plan, it's best to stick to it. That's why I ask about, like, what's the stimulus meant to be? What's the intensity of this? Sometimes the workouts are 90%, sometimes they're 75%, and it's more about volume accumulation. And if you're doing that at high intensity after 3 weeks, you might get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a high risk of that in training camp situations where those men or women are your competition, and there's no way around it. At the end of the year, you got to beat that person. And so if you're not beating them all the time now, then how are you going to beat them later? So there becomes this sense of urgency around it, and it takes a very mature athlete to not fall into that trap.
That's interesting, because most other sports deal with it that way, right? Just dealing with the way that, I was thinking about as an athlete myself, living at the Olympic Training Center, we all moved to the training center to be able to train under one roof. And, we were training with our competition every day, and we were able to see where the strengths and weaknesses and where we fell in line event to event in terms of how we might end up in a competitive setting. Chad, I feel like you preferred to train on your own as opposed to maybe moving to the Olympic Training Center and training with those other athletes. Are you more in line with a Pat perspective on training when it comes to having others around? What are your thoughts on that?
100%. And here's the thing. If we talk about weightlifting specifically, some athletes have seemed to thrive a little bit in training and being able to improve in everything else with a group of other athletes, but they're also not typically the ones that are performing at the highest level. And we're talking about making world teams and international teams and stuff like that. And for weightlifting, there's not really a lot of us who have made it to that highest level just because we just don't have that big of team. So it would be, maybe an interesting study to see, just all the different aspects and results from people training together versus training completely by themselves and only ever coming across another human being in the competition, or maybe a combination of the two. I think when I trained at my best and competed at my best, I would go train with other people, maybe once a week, or even sometimes it was only like once a month, but that was planned into my program. So what that means is that I knew it was coming. So all other days I was just completely by myself, putting in the time in the dark dungeon, as you mentioned, Pat. But then I knew, because I was going to be around other people, that whether I wanted my body to give more or not, emotionally, mentally and physically, there was going to be more effort that was put out in that moment that I was with other people. So what that meant for my following workouts was they had to be less intense than they would have been otherwise. I needed to recover from that to make sure that I could stay on track with my programming. And some of that is me as an individual, but I still think there's a lot of value to that information with anyone. We're all human, and yes, we have differences, but we're more the same than we are different. And when you're around a group of people and you're training all the time with other people, you're taking away a little bit of that edge that you're going to have in competition. The times when I've performed, and again, some of this is me as an individual, but just to speak on it, the times when I've performed the worst in big competitions were times when I was around other people in a team environment. And it was because I didn't trust what I was doing. Right. So I changed it. I thought I was supposed to train with other people. I thought that's what was expected of me and what was going to give me the best results. And therefore that's what I did. But it ended up producing way less results for me. For example, in 2004, I trained at the training center probably for about 6 weeks leading up into the Olympics. And I went up there and within the first couple weeks, hit a PR clean and jerk, huge PR clean and jerk. And I shouldn't have done that. One, I shouldn't have been there in the first place, but I hit that PR. I was just drugged. I never was able to recover from that because I was still constantly in that environment and trying to perform at a high level and compete and show off in front of these people. And so by the time I got to the Olympics, I hit 15 kilos less. That's sad. That's a big, huge underperformance that the base of it is I lost that edge that I would have had in competition otherwise. But again, some of that is individual, but I still think there's value in just thinking about those things. And I do, we've talked to a lot of athletes that are moving to these team camps and stuff like that. And to be honest, Dave, I've always worried about that. I worry about them because they're trying to do something that they feel is best for their career. But I'm just interested to see, what it's really going to mean in the long run.
Interesting.
I think probably you're right, Chad. Like, I think a lot of it depends on the individual. Probably, Dave, some of it may depend on the sport. I think, in 2019, we did that sort of camp before the games. And I struggled at the games. I was very fit at the time. And I made some aggressive decisions in the competition and hurt me. And maybe I was a little bit flat coming into the games and just burnt out from a too hard of a training camp because I was competing with 2 other individual men at our camp every day. So I've had the negative experience of that. And, the years where I've performed my best, a lot of it was just me. And so there's interesting parts of that. For one, I have a partner here. I have a job. She's a doctor in town. Like, I'm not uprooting my life to go move to Montreal. Like, there's just no possible way that would happen. Like, I have a life and I'm happy and I'm settled and that's all good. I'm totally okay with that. The thought of uprooting my life to go do CrossFit somewhere else just feels silly to me. And I think that, overwhelmingly what we've seen with the camps so far is underperformance.
Right.
It could be very much in its infancy, but there was a lot of that movement in the last year or two. We've actually even seen it in years prior for people who qualify for the games for their first time and then quit their jobs and become full-time athletes and then never perform at the same caliber again. I think there's enormous value in having, a life outside of CrossFit. I think it pulls your head out a little bit. It helps you stay a little bit less stressed. It helps you focus on things when you need to focus on them and then leave them and put them down when you need to. I think when you're living in a house with all other athletes and you're all training together and it's all full time, everything becomes about that competitive performance. And that's why, to me, it's a quick route to burnout. And I know that about myself. And so it's just not, I wouldn't do it. I could do a camp with some people maybe for a week, like every now and then for fun. And that's totally fine. And to me, I agree. Like, I know it's fun and I would adjust my programming accordingly. And that's just what it would be. But yeah, overwhelmingly this year, I mean, all of the athletes who went and did that probably performed below expectations across the board. We had many of them not qualify for the games. We had many of them get cut at the games.
Right.
And the ones who even finished in the top 20 probably were performed below what people expected. And then if you look at the men's podium, all 3 of them are people who competed by themselves, train by themselves, do their own thing. So I think the only exception to the rule this year was Tia. And so so far, that's a case study, but we'll see what happens in the next few years. But I think CrossFit is quite a dangerous sport to do that in. I think that there's very high risk of losing the intention in your training and not doing the things that you need to be doing because you're doing things the way someone else is doing. And I think there's such a personalized aspect to success in CrossFit that it seems risky to me.
It's super interesting. Yeah, I think you make a lot of good points. I think my take on it was, in the gymnastics world, even though it's an individual sport, we still prioritize team performance. Mm-hmm. So being around those guys allowed us to understand how to peak team performance as opposed to peak individual performance. And they seem to go hand in hand, but really being around the guys and even understanding what will allow each other to perform at their peak allowed us all to perform at our peak. So I think you're right. It's individual based, but it's also sport specific in terms of why it might be beneficial to be around each other if you're all kind of trying to work towards a group goal rather than just an individual goal.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say, I think Tia is probably 0.001% of the population who that's going to work for, because I don't know her personally, but just watching her compete and listening to her talk and hearing her personality, one, she's above and beyond anyone else, so she doesn't really probably have to compete ever in training. And also, I think she probably just doesn't give a shit. So she's training hard and she's pushing hard, and she probably doesn't give a shit whatsoever about what the other ones are doing or about putting on a show in that moment. And I think she's got, potentially that ability that I don't have. I don't have the ability to completely shut it off when other people are around,
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's an interesting position that she's in, and she's being charitable, really. Like, I feel like she doesn't probably stand to gain that much from having people around, but they may stand to gain from having her around.
Sure.
So I think that it's an interesting case where, like, I don't, like, she doesn't need to do that. It's not helping her any, I don't think.
Yeah.
But so I don't know, like, I mean, for me, if I was in that position, like, am I just going to go to a camp and people are going to see what I do and be like, oh shit, I should start doing that? Am I losing ground by doing that? I don't know, but I'm not so far clear like Tia is that I'd be willing to give up my secret.
Sure.
Well, Pat, man, I feel like we just scratched the surface. That was one of the fastest hours that we've had on our podcast. I appreciate the time. Before we get you out of here, would you mind answering a few last minute questions? Quick ones?
Not a problem at all. Yeah, no sweat.
First one, what sport or discipline you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Ooh.
Oh my.
I don't even know how to answer that anymore. Man, I would say weightlifting right now.
Wow.
Sorry, Dave.
Wow.
I feel like I've done my time in gymnastics is the thing, and I feel like now it's fun to learn new stuff and learn new skills in a new avenue. So I've enjoyed. I feel like since I started CrossFit, that was really fun for me, was to like learn from the ground up, like a new set of skills. And it had been a little while since I'd been doing that, like learning something completely new. So weightlifting had me for a while. So now it's like everything's just so blended that I don't even know. But I feel like if I had to pick, and I've never competed in a weightlifting competition, a pure weightlifting competition, so that might be like a goal of mine to do at some point. But I've done the dance and gymnastics, so I feel like maybe it's just because.
Oh man, you've just made Chad is now your biggest fan in the world.
Oh yeah, even more than I was already. But I'll absolutely take that. I was hoping it was going to go that way, but I wasn't sure it was, Dave. And by the way, congrats on the big 290 snatch. I believe that took third place. Was that what is your best snatch?
That's it. That was a match. Awesome. The 295 would have been a PR, but not quite there.
Beautiful. Well, I mean, it's impressive to hit that 290 in the middle of all that, and I think was that on the
12,
last day?
Yeah.
Event 12 is unreal.
Last event of Saturday. So
crazy.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't sure I'd be up to task, but I was happy with how that one went.
Awesome.
Well, you definitely are the first gymnast to select weightlifting. We've had a bunch of weightlifters select gymnastics, so maybe the tide's turning in Chad's favor here.
Yes, it is. It's a comeback.
Yeah,
that's so funny. So you're saying all the gymnasts pick gymnastics and some of the weightlifters pick gymnastics?
Yes, exactly.
I've been on a string of like 50 in a row that have picked gymnastics.
I'm glad to give you an L then. You needed to come back down to earth. I feel like it's funny. I look at it as like it's fun to do. It's fun to learn new things. Like I really enjoy doing new stuff, and that's why I've just been doing weightlifting not as long, and I feel like I still have so much to learn. And my career in gymnastics, like that'll teach you a lot about the devil's in the details, right? And I think weightlifting is the same way. And I think there's just when you think you know what's going on, like there's a whole bunch more to learn, right? So I really enjoyed that aspect of it, that I can spend a whole day missing lifts and know it's not because I'm not strong enough. It's because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Right.
So
yeah, you just forgot.
I've enjoyed learning that. Yeah. I've enjoyed learning that.
Well, question number 2, any guests that you think would be great for us to have on the podcast?
Ooh. Let me think if I...
We've already had Michelle,
Daniel,
maybe a couple
Have you had
times.
Daniel Brandon on?
She was actually a guest like 2 weeks ago. Yep.
Okay. Trying to think of people who are either really good weightlifters or really good. Oh, have you had fucking Guimel Harrow song?
No.
So he torched all the weightlifting events.
Yeah, he was a monster. He was a monster.
A very, very high power output. He won the sprint, he won the heavier clean event, and he won the snatch. And he won it standing up. Like he snatched 305 in nanos with no problem. Looked like he had plenty of room. So
how's his English?
It's pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
I thought it would be worse. I spent most of Friday, we were just kind of set up in the back next to each other. I chatted with him a lot. Super nice kid. He's like young. I think he's 22. Bright future.
He's a beast out there. Yeah.
If he can learn how to work out for 10 minutes, he'll be. We're all in trouble. We're all in trouble. But yeah, he's a good kid. He might be a fun interview. He's a character, right? He was hyping the crowd and he was doing some fun stuff. So
awesome.
That would be a fun one.
Get him on the list.
Yep. We'll have to look into that for sure. Another one, any books you've come across here recently that you'd recommend to the listeners?
Oh, geez. It's too bad. I feel like I was on a tear for a little while. And then probably the last 2 months before the games, I basically stopped reading. Let me see what I got right here that I read really quick. Well, depends how political you want to get. How
about zero on that one?
Zero political? Okay, then I'll stay away from that one. I read a workout. I read a book called American Dirt recently. That was pretty good. That's a good one. It's fine. It's about kind of like refugees and stuff like that. It's not a bad one. I was going to say, I also read a book recently called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, which is just like, a lot about kind of systemic racism and that kind of stuff. Pretty good, like educational tool, written by an ex-NFL guy, good athlete, does lots of media relations with the NFL now, just like well written, well spoken, easily digestible. And it's just kind of like cool information to read, look at things from a different perspective, maybe than you normally do. So
can you say that
I've
name of that title
enjoyed
again?
reading like that. It's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, another good couple recommendations there we can add to the list. And Pat, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. It's been far too long. I think probably since the training grounds a number of years ago, since both Dave and I.
Yeah, that's like 2017 or something, or
something like that.
Maybe.
It was a while ago. Yeah.
Wow. It's been a while, but I've certainly been keeping up with you ever since then. A big fan, of course, and I know Dave is as well. And it's a pleasure to chat with you. Anything you got coming up you want the folks to know about? Any parting words?
Holy, not a lot. Thank goodness. I'm going to try to enjoy the rest of my summer in a way that you don't really get to do when you're training for the games. And I mean, my next little bits, like we're getting married, my partner and I, in like mid-September. So
nice.
Got to get a lot of organization done for that, and got to pay off some dad debt that I accrued over the course of the last month training for the games. And so it'll be nice. We're just trying to relax for a little bit. I think probably the next time people will see me might be like the Rogue Invitational or something like that. So
Sweet. Gotcha. Well, that wedding prep might be harder than training for the games. I don't know, man. You got to be careful.
We did it. We were supposed to get married last summer, so got postponed with venues being shut down. So we've got most of it done already, thank goodness. So I think most of the heavy lifting is done, and it's a little bit of logistics now. But I've built up a good to-do list for the next week or two. That's for sure. Nice. Well, congrats on that, man. Awesome. Big life step there. And to our listeners, guys, as always, we very much appreciate you guys listening in. Be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also, check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.